Welcome back to Newsday. As promised, we're talking now to the former Deputy Prime Minister, current Shadow Infrastructure Spokesperson Anthony Albanese. Thanks for your company.
Good to be with you, Peter.
You were on radio earlier today talking about a deal being done between the government, well, the Liberal Party essentially, and the Greens for essentially a preference swap deal. Give my viewers a bit of a sense of what we're talking about here.
That's right, and it's a secret deal, obviously.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, and that's why we're calling it out, because it's designed to be kept from voters even on the day, because it's not a direct exchange that would normally take place in an electorate where both sides agree to swap preferences. It's something a bit more sophisticated than that, but it's still pretty crude. And it's that the Greens would get the Liberal preferences before Labor in the seats of Sydney, Grayndler, Melbourne, Batman and Wills.
So the seats where they feel like they're a chance, one of which is yours, they're a chance maybe of knocking off the sitting Labor member.
That's right, and that would make, obviously, Labor's task that much harder to either hold on to 4 of those seats or, in the case of Melbourne, to win that seat. They're seats that the Liberal Party can't win.
It's a big deal for the Liberal Party to preference the Greens. We'll get to some of that in terms of how their members might feel, assuming that this deal is going to go ahead. But what's in it for the Liberal Party?
Well, what's in it for the Liberal Party is not a straight preference deal, but a no preferences in seats where they think they can win. So either they're held seats like Corangamite or Deakin.
So marginal seats?
Marginal seats, mainly in Victoria, because this is a Victorian brokered deal. So 6 Victorian seats: Corangamite, Bruce, Chisholm, McEwen, Deakin and Latrobe. In addition, the northern New South Wales seat of Richmond, which does have a substantial Green presence. There's also, my understanding, is negotiations over the seat of Fremantle, which they haven't managed to land because there's a disagreement over whether the Greens or the Liberals have the best chance of winning that off Labor.
Now, it's an interesting point. You've perhaps partly answered my next question. The Liberal Party at a federal level I've been in touch with, and they deny that there's a deal that's been made at this point in time. Is that perhaps because it's going through the state divisions, if you think that the Liberal Party in Victoria are the ones driving this?
Well, that's certainly very possible, but it's also the case that they'll deny it until the how to votes come out. Okay. The whole idea of this deal was deniability, so that the Greens in Grayndler, for example, in my seat, would say, oh no, we haven't done a deal with the Libs. Look, we're giving Labor preferences before the Liberals. But of course the Liberals don't care about Grayndler. What they care about is seats like Richmond and McEwen and other seats they're trying to win.
And on that,
or seats they're trying to hold.
And on those ones that they're trying to hold or win, the marginal seats, it's not that they're getting Green preferences, but they're at least not having Green preferences do what they normally do and be directed towards the Labor Party. A double-sided how to vote card or no how to vote cards at all.
Or a, choose a candidate of your choice. So either one. The Democrats used to do that from time to time, of course, and that can make an enormous difference. When we're talking about elections being decided, today's news poll, of course, was 50-50. If you get 53% of the two-party preferred vote, that's a landslide to either political party. So at the margin, these seats that are 51-52, that can make a difference of 3 or 4%. Which will change the result.
See, I've written about this in The Australian in terms of what I've believed is the underlying reasons why Labor is opposing this reform in the Senate and indeed should oppose it, and equally why the Liberal Party are pursuing it. This idea of preference swaps in a close election where they can help the Greens out in seats that they don't care about, but they can equally get helped out in marginal seats. They can't do it at the moment because in the Senate, the Greens need your party, the Labor Party, to get over the line. But under the new Senate rules, if they go through the new legislation, they wouldn't need the Labor Party because preferences would be out.
That's exactly right, and you've been spot on with that analysis. Because what essentially it does when you move to optional preferential in the Senate is the Greens think, oh, well, we don't need Labor to get that extra push above the quota. Quite often what's happened for that 6th Senate seat, the Greens might have been on 0.6 of a quota, Labor's on 2.4, our 0.4 gets their person elected. And historically, I've been a part of negotiations as a former party official. That has been traditionally what has happened is that Labor preferences have assisted Greens to be elected. Of course, Bob Brown wasn't elected with a quota for the first time.
He needed Labor preferences.
And you know, this sort of drawing up of the drawbridge once the Greens are in the Senate for anyone else coming through is one of the concerns that we have as well. But it's true that part of the analysis that I certainly had was a pragmatic one of what are the implications behind optional preferential voting for the relationship between the Senate and the House of Representatives. And quite clearly, if this cynical deal proceeds, whereby Greens, who are certainly most of their voters are quite hostile to the government's agenda, and most Liberal Party members are certainly very hostile to the Greens Party agenda, but they're trying to help each other get elected to the House of Representatives. Of course, it probably wouldn't matter as much for who forms government in terms of Greens being elected instead of progressive Labor members.
But individual Liberal voters aren't going to be happy about this sort of an arrangement, nor are individual Greens members. Just quickly though, just to reiterate, how did you get this information? I guess you're not going to give up your source, but it's close enough in the Liberal Party that you're confident that when we have denials coming from Party HQ, your answer is, well, they would say that, wouldn't they?
Well, we haven't had denials.
Okay.
We haven't.
But I have.
Well, we've had denials, them saying to you that it hasn't been concluded.
Okay.
And of course, that's not surprising. There's a bit of wriggle room in that. They can say it hasn't been concluded because we haven't, put the candles on the cake yet. But the cake has been baked and it's sitting there, and it's between. Certainly, the reason why this has got out is the fact that there is disquiet amongst many senior Liberals who
well, it was
don't
Victoria,
want to,
wasn't it? Wasn't it Victoria that it was originally taking this strong stand at the state level?
They put the Greens last, and that worked quite effectively for Ted Baillieu when he ran on that basis. Tony Abbott, of course, at the last election had the same viewpoint, and of course many people in the Greens. I have Greens Party members who vote for me in the electorate because they think having a progressive person who can be a member of the party of government, who can sit around the cabinet table, is in line with what they want in terms of outcomes. So they vote Green in the Senate. Some of them even hand out against us. But on polling day, every time I have people say to me, don't worry, I voted for you in the House of Reps.
I can understand you wanting to out something like this because obviously there are threats there for seats like yours potentially from the Greens. I can understand you wanting to point out to Greens voters as well as to Liberal voters, hey, hang on a second, how do you feel about this? How serious is the threat though, whether it's your seat or other seats?
Oh, it's certainly serious. If you have a look at the seats that have been selected, the 5 seats, in none of them do Labor get an absolute majority of votes. Gentrification is assisting the Greens in inner suburban seats. In my electorate, a home that's been occupied by a Greek family or a Vietnamese family gets sold and a professional moves in who's more likely to vote Green or Labor rather than Labor or Liberal, the historic position that was there in the inner west of Sydney.
Just before we run out of time, I want to move into the Senate very briefly. The deal that is being done in the Senate, that we've seen very publicly being done between the Greens and the Liberal Party, it's my view, this is more a cephalogist question than asking you as a Labor frontbencher, but it's my view that the Liberals need to be careful about this sort of a deal because in the longer term, maybe not in the short term with the Xenophon Party around, but in the longer term, they could be consigning the Senate to a permanent balance of power for the Greens. Now, that is not something that is as much of a problem, I wouldn't have thought, for the Labor Party philosophically necessarily, as it is for the Liberal Party. Why aren't they thinking about that?
Well, they need to think long term, and I think this is an example of what's the problem they're trying to solve. The problem they're trying to solve is that more than 20% of Australians currently don't vote Labor, Liberal, National or Green in the Senate.
Which is a protest vote, effectively.
Absolutely, but you don't solve a political problem through a political manipulation and a fix. And that's what this is. So it's very short term, it's aimed at the next election. This is the biggest change in more than 2 decades. It, of course, has the immediate impact of having a double D election, which I think is likely now, and that removes some of the impediments as they see Ricky Muir and Glenn Lazarus and people who've been elected. But they would have been far better to actually go and engage with those crossbenchers, talk with those crossbenchers. You can get legislation through, as we showed in the minority government between 2010 and 2013, if you treat people with a little bit of respect, if you provide them with proper briefings, if you engage in genuine dialogue with them. This government hasn't done that. They've been arrogant, and now they're trying to fix a political problem with a fix, literally, between themselves and the Greens, and itself in terms of the process, crunching it through with no proper process that would normally take place in terms of scrutiny of the bill. I mean, in the House of Representatives, the day after it was introduced, as they were crunching it through on the Tuesday, they had to move 6 amendments to their own legislation because there was no provision for the counting of the Senate ballot papers in the legislation. That shows it was flawed, and I wonder how many other mistakes there are in the legislation that's been signed off by the Coalition and the Greens.
Anthony Albanese, we appreciate you joining us on Newsday. Thanks for your company.
Good to be with you.
And we're going to be talking to Anthony Albanese in more detail on Sunday for Australian Agenda about this subject as well as others as well. Coming up after the break here on Newsday, all the